Hello everyone, my name is Orr Spiegel from Tel Aviv University. Thank you for joining my talk and thank you for the organizers of the symposium for inviting me to open it. And over the next few minutes I'll be convincing you that it's worthwhile to actually track your animal, usually the host, when studying host-parasite interaction. And the reason it's useful is mostly because we think about the interaction between host and parasite as a feedback that depends on the behavior of the host, which can affect the exposure, the risk, and the transmission to the parasites, and also the behavior of the parasite. For instance, host manipulation changing the host behavior, which affects the dynamics and the probability of further exposure and transmission. So from acknowledging this loop or this feedback, we actually have three main insights that you can talk about. First of all is the temporal dynamics. Certain periods are more important for the transmission. It could be periods of the day, it could be different seasons. Second, we have spatial heterogeneity. The host population and the parasite population both vary in space and time, and you can have hotspots of higher intensity that are really relevant for the transmission more than others. And third is the variation among individuals. And I'm sure that in other talks in this symposium, we'll hear a lot about the idea of super spreaders and how to identify them. And this notion of individual variation is actually super important when it comes to modeling the dynamics of the host parasites. And because of that, we used to rely on SEIR models, but now we are actually expanding our toolkits and we do a lot of social networks modeling. For instance, these are sleepy lizards tracked with GPS to establish their social networks, male and females, and they are the main host for a certain tick species. So, and on top of that, we also use a lot individual-based model. Here they are especially explicit, it doesn't have to be. And using these models, we're trying to understand how the system of focus works. Now, what all these expansion of the models have in common is that we need longitudinal data on the individuals, how they behave through time, how they move through space, and what are the social interactions, because we realize they are very heterogeneous. Luckily, we live in a period where we actually have many more tools to measure these dependencies and these longitudinal data. And these technological development actually facilitate coping with this challenge, especially looking on the small scale interactions, short-term interactions, and there are various techniques. I'm not trying to cover all of them here, but you can think about simple tagging of the individuals. This is classical. RFID P tags that tells you, oh, the data is here, the individual is here, and gives you presence absence data. And also radiotelemetry, which is classical and being used a lot. And the modern methods, for instance, GPS or proximity sensors, are becoming more and more available as time progresses. If you want to think about a generalization for that, you can think about methods varying in the quantity, how many data points we generate per individual, per day, per tracking period. And we can think about the data quality, how accurate. So RFID will only give us low accuracy. We know the individual is close to this receiver, and GPS will give you high accuracy. Another consideration that we should think about is the cost. How much the tag cost, how much the receivers cost, and now you can place methods on this virtual scope, and obviously it's relevant for various questions and various trade-offs that you have here. So for instance, GPS gives you really high quality and really intensive sampling, but it's pretty pricey. And this is obviously a simplification, with some methods being more useful than others for different questions, but maybe this is a general concept on the tools. Given these tools, we can study the movement ecology of the host, of the vectors, of the parasite, depending on the system. But movement ecology is not only the tools, it actually gives us a few possible insights on the process, on the exposure, on the risk, on the transmission. And you can think about the spatial extent. So if I track the host and I know how far it goes and what is the home range, I know what is the potential range of possible transmission. Second, we can look on spatial temporal patterns of the parasite prevalence. the host spends more time here, prefers this habitat, stays here. So we know much more than just averaging across the entire home range. Third, we can look on specific behaviors that influence the transmission probability. For instance, if we know that they are grooming and this is when infection occurs, we can look on the data on stops with other individuals and identify groomings or use accelerometers to identify that. And last, we can, if we have high quality data, we can also look on heterogeneities in the social context among hosts. I showed you the social network behavior. It doesn't have to be network. It can be also just pairwise interactions. But these are all types of insights that you can look on the host behavior and how it affects parasite transmission. And these are ordered by the quality data that increases. So here we can deal with even a few points a day. For this type of insights, we really need high resolution data that will allow us to understand how far they go, where, when, how efficient they are as a possible vector, and also on the individual variation among them. But movement ecology is not only the effect of the host on the parasite and not only better tools, we also have some conceptual framework. And essentially this field is asking how different factors interact to affect the animal movement and how this movement affect the ecological processes. That's the movement ecology paradigm, if you want. And the fact that we have better tools develops and pushes forward both the theory, both the analytical approaches for addressing movement data and especially reach. And if you notice, the behavioral feedback that we talk about is actually included because this is internal state, why the individual move. This is the motion capacity. How does it move? Does it run? Does it swim? Is it escaping predator and it has to do it fast? This is the navigation capacity. Where should the individual move? What kind of information he has on the environment? And this is obviously the external environment. So all these are common into the focal individual. And the outcoming movement path actually eventually affects both the external factors and the internal state of the individual, the reason for initiating movement. And this is essentially the host-parasite feedback translated into the movement ecology. So we can think about it and identify different mechanisms in which the parasite might affect the host movement. And separating between these mechanisms can actually allow us to generate more prediction. So if until now we generally spoke about the under loop going back to the host, so now we can talk about the trivial things. The parasite affects motion capacity. In many cases, individuals are weaker and therefore they do not have a chance to move as fast. In other cases, it could be the motivation or the navigation. For instance, the host doesn't know where to go or changes his priorities and now looks for water and so on. And obviously, it can affect the external environment. For instance, if other individuals are avoiding it, and we'll hear about avoidance in the future talks. So we can close this loop and look on the 4 aspects in which host behavior affects the parasite and on the specific mechanism and scales in which the parasite affects the host behavior. And just to summarize, first of all, I think that tracking individuals will give us good fitness data and long-term survival, which is really hard to obtain without it. It can reveal the different aspect of the host exposure, risk, and transmission, and how they change across time, space, social units, and individuals. It can provide alternative pathway for instance, for the parasite influence, why in some cases hosts move more and in some cases hosts move less, and these are the 4 components here. And we can quantify the heterogeneity in space, why certain locations behave differently or why in different times and different individuals we have different factors. And I propose that movement can bridge a central knowledge gap in this feedback of host-parasite interaction and therefore should be beneficial. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to the organizer, my collaborator, and I'm happy to take questions in the Q&A session below. Goodbye.